Well, that was crazy. Jeez. Oh, it's on a roll. I don't even know if Twitch will save that first part. Who cares? Let's just keep moving. Yeah, like the whole apartment just went black. So like everything shut off. The PS4 reverted back to 1080p, so I have to change that back to 720 to get it to work with my capture card. Everything, all my windows were messed up. At least some of the stuff saved automatically. That was kind of fortunate, but took however long that took to get back up and running. But it doesn't matter. We're back and everything's good. Thanks Lesson Pi for the welcome back. We're gonna keep rolling. And things are not loading like they should be. Load up better. Got that Pokemon Picross music in the back, which I'll turn down because I think that's too loud. I think that's a better volume. It's Pokemon Picross after all. Nobody really needs to listen to that too much. Even though, okay, so Pokemon Picross, I think it's the best version of Picross, and it actually ties into teaching and scaffolding and all that cool stuff that we were kind of talking about earlier. So maybe we'll talk a little bit about Pokemon Picross in a minute, but I want to do some more witness stuff. You know, when I like to write articles, I like to be very thorough. I like to be very clear and accurate. And one of the things I'm wondering right now with the witness, which I'll pick up my controller here, is that I wonder how many of these sort of linear tutorialized quote-unquote sections there are in the game compared to, I guess, other challenges and other puzzles. Hear that grass and the crunchy grass. And the reason I say that, some people think the whole game was a tutorial. Somebody had a really weird quote the other day. It was really weird. He said, the whole game of The Witness is a tutorial, and it only starts becoming a quote-unquote game right at the end. I was like, what? So I think that person was conflating a smooth difficulty progression, which is common to puzzle games and maybe just most games in general. He was conflating that with it being a tutorial section for the game, but no, like, you always should be learning and being exposed to a new idea and like working through a game on that respect. So like, just because this game doesn't necessarily combine a lot of the elements until the later part of the game, it still combines some elements, but I wouldn't call this tutorial sections. I mean, that's why there's really a fuzzy line between this counting as a tutorial section versus anything else in the game, because a lot of what's in the game is just like this. I mean, I guess you could assume this super simple puzzle is so simple that it's like obviously there to teach you, but some people, again, we have evidence of people talking about how they can't quite extrapolate what their rules are by doing some of these simple puzzles, and they don't go back to experiment on them. So they're a little bit more complicated than how they look, and the whole game is like this. Whether you start off, I mean, you guys remember the very beginning of the game, it was just like a line. Maybe I'll run back there real quick, but the doors that started this whole game off are about as brain dead as it gets. Brain dead's being not a very good term there, but the first two puzzles in the entire game have the least complexity and the least possibility of messing them up. There's the second one, and ooh, it's dark, it's so dark. There we go. Here's the first one. First one is this, really hard to mess it up, but you do learn that, you know, puzzles start in the dot and then you go to the echoing endpoints. That's important to learn, whether you think the puzzle's simple or whatever. Like, then you learn here that not everything is as straightforward as it looks. You take a left turn. From there, you know, you go into all kinds of mazes. So, so this intro area is kind of interesting. You know, all the panel puzzles here can be solved. They teach you different things. There is a sort of a playthrough done by the, I'm gonna get their name wrong, so I'm gonna look it up. Here, let me click back over to the beep design oriented. I'm gonna type in The Witness. I'm going to type in Twitch. There's a Twitch video that I saw. It's right here. Scholars Play The Witness Part 1. And it's a long video. They play The Witness for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, and they just 4 people sitting on the couch. All of them are going for like master's degrees or PhDs. That's why they call themselves scholars play. And they did a kind of a neat job starting the game off and talking about some of these intro areas. The lights just flashed. Hopefully the stream holds up. But as far as The Witness goes, and as far as tutorials go, like the first 2 puzzles I just showed you, but then you get in this open area, and in order to unlock this door, right, with all the little switches unlatched, let's follow this black line, you have to go into 3 different areas and solve the puzzle. So that means even in this intro area, there's a little bit of non-linearity to it, but you know, you can start off here and do this one. This was an example of a complex puzzle that appears like you can't solve it, but you really can. It shows you that there can be 2 starting points to a puzzle and things may be complex. You know, this one shows you that only the ending with a curved mark at the end, right here. This thing, only that is a true ending, and all these other flat endings are not real endings. So only look for true ending or hidden goal. This one shows you that, again, it's a complex one, but it doesn't have the same complexity as the other one with lots of breaks. This is just lots of squiggle lines, so you know you can solve that one. And you learn slightly different things, just really getting yourself in the appropriate mindset to solve some of these puzzles. I like this one. But this one shows that you have 2 possible solutions, right? And you're like, oh, let me just you know, do this like that. So you learn a lot even in this intro area, and that's kind of the thing with learning, right? Concepts are very important to grasp, but concepts alone, especially when they're not stacked on top of pre-existing concepts, the fact that puzzles can start with different starting points, have different ending points, and so on and so forth, those are such low-level independent concepts. There really isn't an order to learn one versus the other. So that's why this intro area is kind of divided into 3, I think, and you can take a lot of liberty in teaching the player those concepts because 1, you'll learn them with a mere exposure of 1 or 2 panel puzzles, and 2, the ideas don't stack, so just learning them out of order or whatever doesn't really hurt. So this whole intro area, because of the low complexity, and basically because of the low complexity, you can afford to do more things like that. And I think this intro area is a good microcosm of how the entire game works, but the rest of the game is much more complex. So even when you go out here, you know, like Mega Man, people think that there is a quote-unquote, yeah, I'll move the camera. There we go. People say there's a quote-unquote proper way to play through the bosses by starting with the weakest boss, getting their powers, and using those powers to be super effective on the later bosses. I think that's all baloney, and you should play the game however you want and go after the bosses you think, you know, give you the most attitude, right? You should play how you feel. There's no right way to play Mega Man, but there are many cool ways to play Mega Man, right? There's no one right way to play Mega Man. There are wrong ways to play Mega Man, and I like to play the game with just Buster because that makes me learn the bosses as purely and as effectively as possible, right? It's the hardest way to beat most of the bosses, and by lowering the complexity of what I expect in terms of like which weapon I should use and how much ammo do I have, I just focus purely on movement and patterns, and I like that a lot. Similar with The Witness, people say there's like an order to it, right? They say you're supposed to come out of this first intro area, and then you're supposed to go to this door, right? And see that this door is something you can't possibly solve because you're like, what are these symbols? And then you're supposed to immediately come out here and, oh, what are these blue panels? And by going to these blue panels, you learn how the black and white symbols work. And then you immediately turn to your right, oh, green. And you go over here and you learn how the dots, the hexagon dots work. And because the door you saw initially was composed of black dots or black and white squares and hexagon dots, you're like, wait, now I think I understand. And you can come back here and solve this immediately. You go in here and you unlock this little chest, which gives you something of a secret, but you have no idea what this is for. And that kind of is a nice vertical slice of what the entire Witness game is going to be like. I think, you know, you have some areas of simple, strict, linear sort of teaching progression. You have a little bit more freedom when you step out, and then you have things in the near area that work together to solve some of the hidden things. And I think you're just supposed to take that as this is what the game's going to be about and get used to it. But some people say right after you solve this area, you go over here, follow the path, you do this area, then you go and do the what is it? Symmetry. You go and you just follow this core and do the symmetry area to completion. When I say do, I mean do to completion. And then you go from the symmetry area to the desert and you just work your way around the map because you're like, yeah, I'm following this trail. And if you do that, the puzzles that you do are, you know, increasingly complex, and you save some of the hardest ones for last. And some people think that's a really good idea. But the whole lure of this game, I think, is the fact that it's an open world puzzle game. I'm gonna put that on the notes. I think some of my other notes got deleted. That's all right. Open world puzzle game. Right. So, like, if you're gonna stick something in the open world, yeah, there's pros and cons to doing that. Everybody knows. Like, whenever you pick any kind of sort of large game-defining level design sort of direction or feature like that, there's a lot of pros and cons you got to consider right off the bat. And personally, I just don't think there's that much pros to having an open world in general. So, video games already, even going back to Super Mario Brothers on the NES, can be highly focused with their linear progression. They can also contain lots of secrets and optional challenges and content. Video games have variable difficulty like that, so Mario Bros. Takes care of that too. Video games can offer branching paths with its overworld progression, so that you don't have to go the same order, the same way every time. Mario Bros. Does that as well, and it's been getting crazier ever since for many different types of games from many different countries and developers and whatever. But then one other thing is video games can also be highly dynamic, right? So one thing I love about Mario Brothers is the way they do power-ups and how the scarcity of power-ups in some Bowser stages and the last world in the game gets scarcer and scarcer, as do coins. So you have less abilities to get more one-ups with coins, and you have less of an ability to stay in a powered up state when you get closer and closer to the end of the game. And if you die on 8-4, you just can't get any more power-ups, period. That's kind of like really intense, right? So that means the effort that you put into your only one chance to bring a fire flower to Bowser happens, I think technically on 8-2, that's the last power-up you can get. Is that true? I have like level maps in my head, and I think there's one mushroom you can get, unless that was a one-up mushroom, but there's like one chance you can get a power-up, maybe in 8-3. And then you're on your own for the rest of the game, because you can't go back in levels if you get to 8-4. You gotta waste all your lives trying to solve it right there, right? So that's kind of a quality of Picross. Ooh, that's kind of a quality I call suspension, where you take elements from one part of the gameplay experience. Oh, we ran out of Pokemon Picross music. Does anybody else have any good suggestions? If you have a good suggestion of a puzzle game with neat music, I'm all ears. Just type in the chat, and I'll try to find an OST. But this idea of suspension, right? So I'm going to type that in. Open world game suspension. And that means you're taking elements from one part of the game and like taking them into another, right? Where it's like, oh, clearly, you know, this element was for this area, but what is it like if you take it over to this area? What can you do? How interesting is that? And sometimes you think, oh, that only makes sense in the context of those old games, because, you know, they had levels that loaded in and out, and they had limitations with their hardware. So like even if you could take something from one area to another, that's why that's special, right? Not, but now that we have more powerful, now that we have more powerful machines, right? Like suspensions everywhere. Like you can you can do that kind of stuff with open world design. You can do that kind of stuff with just large levels, right? Yada yada. I'm like, well, I'm still not so sure. I'm not so sure about that. So think about it like this: just give and take. You can have the most open game, kind of like The Witness is right now. All this space is fully traversable 3D game space. And you're like, look how open it is, right? But you can't move this rock, you can't move this plant, you can't jump in the water, you can't um, really do anything to affect the environment. All you do is walk around inside of it. Maybe move a bridge or two. Let me move this bridge to show you what I'm talking about. It's on the other side. Well, screw you, bridge. But you can't really do that much. This game's pretty, and there's a lot you should and can do by looking into the environment and keeping aware and observant of your surroundings, but not a lot of interactivity, right? And then perhaps you'll take a game like Grand Theft Auto, and you're like, okay, yeah, you can drive everywhere. And sometimes people chase you, but the quality of that gameplay experience depends on like if the AI is smart enough to know kind of like how to drive, how far they chase you, like what are the rippling consequences of your actions, and is that interesting, and where does it cut off, and so on and so forth. Those become the considerations, right? So even though games nowadays have great graphics and they test the player in all these crazy ways, let me check this out. Even though they have all these crazy graphics, oh, I'm so close, and they test the player in these crazy ways. Ooh, secret. Hopefully that didn't. I need to check my audio settings because I don't think that sounds very good to me. Hopefully it didn't kill your ears. But yeah, just because a game is in a large 3D environment, just because it's in an open world, just because it's a sandbox, doesn't mean that you have meaningful suspension, right? And that's why I said it's a give and take. On the one hand, you need to have on the one hand, you need to have actual sections demarked by some kind of like boundary or interactive limitations, and then you can see how those sections bleed into each other. So with music, there's a concept. I mean, this is where I took the term from, suspension. It's where you have a note or whatever. Are we still good? Okay, yeah, it's rumbling outside. All right, so let me pull up the article then. That's a good idea. A good question, lesson pi. Just so we're super clear. What am I doing? So this is an article I wrote a long time ago. I type in the word suspension here in the designoriented.net. I also type in my name. And here are the two articles that I wrote about it. You go further back, 2008. This is the first time I wrote about it. And here's the quote. Here's some quotes. Let's see. Some games that I mentioned in it. Let's clickety-click. So let's take a closer look at suspension. As I mentioned in my Mario Melody series on counterpoint suspension is when game elements... You guys hear that? Suspension is where game elements and ideas are offset from each other, or when game elements travel across gameplay ideas and sections. Examples of suspension can be found in most games, but there's 3 different types. So you can do suspension that isn't really tied to the game world. I call this abstract suspension. Like, your coin count is something that carries over from level to level, and you may be able to create strategies in the original Mario Bros. Where you're like, if I collect 20 coins here, and on the next level I collect 50. And the next level I collect X amount, I can get a 1-up before level 4, which I need to, beat the boss, right? Well, that's because the coin count is something that that's relevant and carries over from level to level. If the coin count reset every level and it was just about how many coins you can get for that level, there wouldn't be any suspension of that score value. So like you wouldn't be able to have these level to level strategies. It's either collect 100 coins in one level or nothing. And you can contrast this simply with something like Mario 64, where you get 100 coins in the level, you get a star, but otherwise you can't get a few coins in one level and then a few coins in another. Here's some other examples. But the classic example I love are power-ups in the original Mario Bros. Like I was saying with the Fire Flower. You can get a power-up and then take it to just about any level you want, including the Frog Suit in Bros 3, and take it and try to defeat Bowser. Frog Suit's already rare enough. It already makes it awkward to move on land, but isn't that hilarious? Like, you took something from World 3, the Water World, and you tried to defeat Bowser in World 8. Whether or not you sort of tuck it into your inventory, I think the cooler version of Suspension is where you wear the suit and try to survive with it as much as possible. And everybody knows that feeling in the Mario game, trying to take your Hammer Bros suit or your Tanuki suit as long as possible because you carry it with you, and that's pretty cool. Other examples are more organic style suspensions. So this is New Super Mario Bros. DS, and this is my favorite level in the entire game. I think it's what is the level? 7-5. Beautiful level, just incredible level. I wish I could play it for you right now, but in this game, you can take bombs from some areas and run with them and throw it into other areas, especially to blow up these bricks that can only be blown up by bombs. You can run with bullet bills left or right and travel with them across the entire level. Like right here on the screen, I have 7 bullet bills all on the screen just because I, juked the bullet bill shooters specifically in a specific way, and then I also kept up with them on the screen. So that's like really cool, right? Like your whole level can change depending on how you take elements from the very beginning of the level to the end to the beginning, and you mixing and matching things all around. Like, it's just super cool. I love it. But the only reason that it's neat and distinct when you play the game is because the game has these clear sections. Like, this is where the bullet bill goes. When it shoots off the screen, it's gone. But then there's these really interesting and clear possibilities of, well, if it doesn't go off the screen, where does it go? Like, oh, it stays on the screen. And that can make challenges easier or less easy or harder or whatever down the line. But you have these clear areas where you know what is more or less expected of you and the elements within the level, and then you can kind of push beyond those boundaries with suspension. Here's a really cool example of the original Metroid, where the guy kites this enemy at the top that goes in this looping pattern, opens the door, has the enemy hit him as he goes to the door, takes an enemy from one room into another, has the enemy come back after it bounces off this wall, freezes it in midair, and does a sequence break and skips the need to defeat Ridley altogether, just to save time, because it's a speed run technique. That's amazing. Like, that enemy should have stayed in that original room, but just because of the way the rules work, you can carry it over to this next room and do crazy things after that. So essentially what we're looking for and I think one of the most important things to consider when you're talking about open world games is not how pretty they look or how large their open world environments are, but what kinds of dynamic interactions there are and how much suspension there is, right? So I'm going to put suspension and dynamic interactions. So for action games, it's pretty clear, like, oh, enemies that don't just have AI that turns them around and keeps them within a small invisible box, or being able to take an item from one part of the world to the other, just like these Mario examples. We can all understand that. But for puzzle games, it's different. Oopsie, what was that? I'm going to type in a puzzle game. Let me type in Zen'Gage OST. Wow, they actually have it. I'm going to click on it. So yeah, one of the interesting things to consider for open world games is those dynamic elements and suspension. And for puzzle games, especially the Witness, where all the gameplay, I'll show you, is confined to these panels. Like, what would it mean to create suspension? Like, what's dynamic about this world? What's dynamic about me walking across this area right here. You are too loud to engage. You be quiet. Alright. So what's interesting about being here in this field, right? What's interesting about walking and having to physically walk across this island until, you know, you find the boat. What can I carry over from one area to the other in the Witness if I can't pick up items, if I can't change almost anything about the world, right? Well, what's interesting about the arrangements of all these things in the context of an open world? Like, what is the benefit of everything being in this huge continual space, right? And I think the best thing and the best reason why The Witness is an open world game is because it establishes a foundation of realism, quote unquote, of your character's perspective and expectations when you're like, okay, this is the world, right? No crazy teleportation, no crazy cutscenes, no crazy warping from one area to the other. When you enter this game, you are a continuous body that has you are a continual body that has to move from one area to the other. I never said it wasn't open world because there's locks. And then what The Witness does ultimately with some of the cooler things is that it creates a contrast between what's happening in these panel puzzles and what's happening in the world around you, and it juxtaposes that, and that's kind of gives you your frames of references, which is what the game The Witness is kind of playing off of the whole time. You're supposed to be acutely aware of various frames of references, points of view. Like, this character has eyeballs and it can only see from this point of view. When you go to a panel puzzle, you can only manipulate the puzzle, and that's like its own isolated world, like this. When you step out of the puzzle, like, what do you see, and how do the things around you affect both how you solve the puzzle and how you think about the world? And then there's like one or two more layers beyond that. But that's a pretty compelling reason to frame the game like this. I think you can convey a lot of things you couldn't with only panels. Yeah, some people made the argument that this game could have just been done in a series of menus, but I don't know how they can create symbols with the world itself. What do you mean? Yes. Yeah, less than pi. What do you mean by setting the tone? And oh, I can do medios. Oh yeah, cool. Yeah, take all the time you need. A lot of people are dumb. Like, there's no way this should have been a $5 Flash game. One, it takes like 15, 40 hours to beat, whatever that number is, doesn't really matter. Like, Flash games, I sit down and I beat in a sitting in like 15, 30 minutes. So one, no. Two, you know, to get these graphics and to get this open world, it's expensive. So, you know, come on, pay artists, pay the creators, for crying out loud. Three, that's kind of what we're discussing right now, like how important is this open world to the experience of The Witness. And The Witness is obviously more than just panel puzzles. Like, I think everybody realizes that. Yeah, it's more than panel puzzles. And what the game does is hopefully you're a little bit more sort of metacognitively self-aware of how you think and why you think that when you play these panel puzzles. And because the panel puzzles are so abstract, you know, you really shouldn't have any other sort of biases or preconceived notions, because it's really hard to relate them to any other idea other than sort of the abstract solving puzzle exercise, right? And then from there, he contrasts that with some of these ideas, like, especially via the recordings, but even in the environment itself. What it's like to observe something, what it's like to believe something, what it's like to know something, what it's like to have a frame of reference. Like all these things that are considerations for people who become more and more aware of their own thoughts, their own presence, their own limitations as a thinker, and something who can, an agent who can act in this world, and someone who can know things. So, you know, it plays on those things over and over, and it builds up that whole mental experience via these puzzles, and then how these puzzles contrast with the environment. The world is divided by sections and themes and helps orient the players, and its art direction gives visual clues. Even if you don't learn that way or care, it's an extra layer of teaching. Yeah, like, even if you don't need it, that's a good point. Like, it's good that it's there. I mean, that's part of what makes the game accessible and good for more people than just that one guy who claims he or she didn't need any help and beat this game in 2 minutes without looking at the screen. We all know that guy. I'll show you my favorite example, and this is an example that was actually cited in the in one of the interviews I'll show you. Interviews I listened to about The Witness. It was the 3 artists that were brought on board to model this entire world. They talked about what it was like with the development process, and they talked about how they even designed some of the puzzles in the game. I'm gonna type in Medium interview. We'll give that a spin right here. So here's the interview I was talking about. It's the Witness interview with Eric Orshey and Lewis, and they talked for about 2 hours. This thing is long, but they talk about, you know, what it was like to work with Jonathan Blow, what it was like to internalize his philosophy and work on the game, how long it took, why it took so long. Then they talked about how much work they put into the environment and why. Like, so the environment is more than just being pretty, right? The environment also has is abiding by this philosophy that they were working on of no filler, right? So like, they said every single thing in this game is placed for a reason, and I think that's a bit of an exaggeration, right? Like, what about this spec right here? Is that there for a reason? And even if the reason is simple, like, that's probably the same with most games and most designers, right? Like, they put the stuff in their game for a reason. Even if the reason is not entirely consistent or as well executed as you might think, like, it's a little disingenuous to say, like, oh, everything in my game is there for a good reason, while the stuff I don't like about other people's design choices are obviously there for bad reasons, and they probably put them there arbitrarily or haphazardly. Like, don't go there. But one example that I really like is this area here in the desert. Ooh, I love this song, Texas. Let's listen to this for a bit. That's enough. Okay, so these panel puzzles here give you no clue on how to solve them, right? You're just sitting there going like, how do I solve these? I don't even know, you guess, and you're bad. And took me, at first I didn't know how to solve them, so I left the whole area, but it turns out that if you look at the panels from a certain angle, you get this glare, and the glare actually reveals, as you can see here, what the solution is, and you can even solve it from this far away. Oop, you can. There we go. Yeah, I solved it. Wow. So this puzzle, this whole area, this desert area, is about reflection and light and perspective, right? And you kind of have to stumble upon this first one in order to even get that going. But fortunately, see how the sand has a glare? And see how the shining things on the ground here and up there have a glare? If you stand on it just right, let me see if I can get it. There, white glare, and you can even do some of the secret puzzles by connecting that, right, if you get it just right. Right. So there's glare there, and then if you go over here, there's these other structures that also use the glare to hide like secret little environmental puzzles, right? So like right here, if you stand on it just right, ooh, glare. So even if you couldn't figure out the well, that was one I didn't do yet. Whatever. So even if you couldn't figure out how to do the panels over this main area, if you just hang out here enough, the same interactions, the same elements, the same ideas are being expressed elsewhere, and that should lead you more, that should get you closer and closer to being able to stumble upon it yourself. Because after you looked at all that glare stuff, you gotta kind of notice like, oh, glare here, then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, that's what happened to me. So they say they put a lot of environmental things in the game to help clue players in on how to stumble across some of these things themselves. And, you know, that's great. I don't even know how many there are. I don't even know how many different ways they studied how people look at these things and tackle these problems to put even more clues into the environment. But essentially, this entire game is designed to help you stumble upon these solutions and find the answers to get at least get started. And I do not think that attitude and that design direction is different from how most people design their games, especially Nintendo, which Jonathan Blow thinks this game is very un-Nintendo-like, but Nintendo does the very same things. Looks at how the players play, observe their actions, put tiny hints in the environment, whether it's architecturally, whether it's sound, whether it's motion with enemies, whether it's sound effects, like all these weird clues. And then they also use symbols, and then they also use text with your companion party telling you things. But people just either freak out because, oh no, Fee tells me some stuff every now and then. Oh, I want to do it myself. Like, you do like 98% of this yourself. And Zelda's also like an action game. It's not a puzzle game. So even if it says go up there and kill that thing, like you still gotta go over there and figure out how you're gonna win in that battle. So a little bit of verbal assistance is what Nintendo figured would be helpful for their much broader audience, right? Kids and kids to adults and all these different longtime fans and new fans playing Zelda all the time. It's a very popular and large and loved series. So they make decisions like that. It's not that big of a deal. But it's cool that The Witness is designed with that in mind. That's, I think, a really good justification. The way sort of things are designed to help you discover them, whether it's really subtle or really kind of obvious. But I think that's a really good justification for this open world conceit that exists to frame the panel puzzles, right? But so that's one big thing. I'm gonna put notes for that. So suspension dynamic, and I'm gonna put scaffolding and embedded tutorials. Tudes. I'm gonna call them tudes. So too bad. And then another one I want to write is this whole idea of so like in this case we just talked about hints, like how to give the player hints. But there's a whole other part that I want to discuss, which is, you know, the importance of the exposure of ideas, limiting the player to only taking so many ideas at a time, and how the open world structure lets the player, for their benefit, leave areas or to their detriment. So I'm going to put sequencing in order / order. I'm going to move this. Why do they do that? Why? Why do you always mess up my thinking? That's fine. Okay. Oh, did you? So Lesson Pi was working on your thoughts. Let's see. Bleach, in the meantime, was saying there are about 12 themes to the puzzles. That's a lot to learn individually. These elements start to get woven together and become even more complex. All these things help our minds better, as well as yeah, hints and stuff, reminders. I think the guy in the video we watched the other day called them reprisals, which is basically revisiting an old idea with a little twist. He's like, "You remember? Like, come on, let's go." I wrote about in my series about linearity how important it is to revisit ideas, because when we think linearly, and then we also need to like, so check out this. Why am I using my hands when I can frickin' draw on my own screen? Check this out, fancy powers. So let's say this cool. Oh no! Let's see if this works. No. I need to lock the screen. Why didn't they tell me? There we go. So let's say this right here, that Y shape, is a branch. And you're teaching the player ideas of this shape. And then at some point it branches right here. And you're like, oh, so you can go down this path, the left path, and learn all kinds of things right here. But when you want to teach them stuff about the right path, or you have to kind of go back to where the things split right there, and then kind of revisit those ideas before you reorient them and take them down another path. And the player's journey through learning things are going to be linear. So having a reminder that kind of brings them back and orients them properly, and then sending them off into a new direction is really important. And that's kind of what the other guy was talking about when he meant reprisals. And in general, and the teaching concept, refreshers, reminders, and revisiting content is just absolutely necessary. It just keeps people on board. So Lesson Pi here says, by setting tone and being mood, you have light, airy sections and dark, defensive ones, color and shades, and green space, light, shadow. You can express ideas. Oh yeah. So like definitely the environment just in its own sake is pretty, and for this game in particular, it's a very self-reflective, meditative, contemplative, metacognitive type experiences, more so than a lot of other puzzle games. So being in nature, which I really appreciate, and having all these interesting colors and such care done to the art, really sort of gives you a nice, compelling reason to sort of step back and take in the environment around you, especially when the environment has clues. So, like, not only does it set the mood and make this place very inviting in the aesthetic sense, but it may even encourage you to take breaks when necessary. Lesson Pi says, but I like the way they use elevation to show goals. This works generally with smaller puzzles. The last panel is generally the highest in the section, and the way you can always see your end goal from anywhere on the map, which he's referring to this mountain. As you can see, all the lasers are kind of going there, and you can walk there. I think you naturally want to get higher in the game, and in life too, the desert puzzles, reflections, that's when you go up high. Yeah, there's a lot of puzzles in the desert where higher elevation helps. You couldn't do that only with puzzles, yeah, that way. To do a reflection puzzle without the 3D world, you'd have to do something clever like a 3DS game where you have to tilt it and it would sense the motion controls and then thered be a glare on it. There's a really cool DS game that does that. Does anybody know what it is? I'm just throwing that question out there. I'll let you guys stew on it for a second. So yeah, I think the game that does it is... what am I thinking of? Paper Mario Sticker Star for the 3DS uses the gyroscope inside of it, the motion controls, to know when you're tilting the DS to put a sheen on the glossy sticker elements, which is really amazing looking. Kirby Tilt and Tumble, that's a funny example. Kirby Tilt and Tumble is such a great game, one of my favorite Kirby games of all time. But the worst part about the game is playing it on a Game Boy Color. It didn't have backlight, so every time I tilted it,
I need to I need to catch the sunlight to see the game properly, but when I tilted it, it would glare. And man,
I fought to play that game, and I still love it.
So yeah, the DS games do a lot of clever stuff with motion controls a lot of the times. And a simulated glare in Paper Mario Stick and Star is one of the most clever things that I've ever seen. It actually inspired me to come up with a new way of creating a feedback system for visualizing a lot of stacked properties in Fire Emblem. Like when your character is like buffed defensively and offensively and has a high crit bonus and has a this and that, and you're like, whoa, how many buffs do I have? I thought of a really cool way to take that same idea and put it in the Fire Emblem, where if you tilt your DS, you kind of catch the glare of all your different buffs. So if you just kind of tilt your DS down, let's say blue is all the defensive buffs, you're like, okay, these characters are blue buffs. Tilt to the left, and like these characters out. Accuracy, speed, attack, and you just kind of rotate your DS to get a cool like summary shimmer of what your units have.
Let's get away from this waterfall, it's too loud. I thought that would have been a cool thing, but yeah. Yeah, those are good points about the level, or what the witness does, merely with this environmental, 3D environmental world. So here's the thing I'm really curious about. People talked about this game like, you know what's great about the open world? If you get stuck, you can just go to another area. I'm like, let's talk about puzzle games and let's compare that to what are we gonna compare that to? Pushmo? Can I even show you Pushmo? My DS? Probably not. So many puzzle games. I have games on Steam, but that doesn't really matter. Let's pull up a screenshot of Snakebird, right? I mean, I don't remember. There's not many puzzle games that I can remember that force you to play their levels in the order that they want without having any other way of playing any other part of their game. Let's go back to this screen. Snakebird, fantastic puzzle game. I haven't beaten it yet. Don't yell at me. But as you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But look what happens when you unlock 7. Can you guys see that? Yeah, look what happens when you unlock 7. You get Star World, which is an extra level. You get 8 and 9 unlocked, and you can kind of branch off from there. Look, you also got 21 and 10 unlocked. Now, obviously, when they're numbered, it's pretty easy to go in order, but you have the opportunity to branch out and try some other areas if you want. This is kind of like the the license board system. Everybody remember the license board from Final Fantasy 12? Where you kind of unlock it and the nearby things are available to unlock. So this, even Snakebird, like, you've got some non-linear ways of tackling problems. You can try the hard ones early if you want. You can see how hard they are. You can come back. Pushmo does a similar thing where they give you a group of levels, about 8 to 15 levels, we'll say. And they say, I think they make you complete them all before going on to the next section, but you can tackle any of those in any order. So you can go to the end, you can go to the front, you can see one you want to play, you can do that one Pushmo. Gives you a small contained area to do before moving on. I'm not, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think some of the later Pushmo games, you don't have to do them all 100%, but you can do most of them and still move on, because there's a few times where I didn't get all the birds in Crash Mode, and they let me go to the next area, so I'm like, hey, I'll come back for you. And the birds are the things you do when you get the, when you beat the level. Nothing crazy. So, like, puzzle games do this all the time. You know what puzzle games don't do this? Puzzle script games. And if you've never played Puzzle Script, it's like a free puzzle editor that's browser based. Some of those puzzle games are still just fantastic puzzle games, and I recommend Sokoban and so many others because they're so clever and so neat and so short. You can beat them in 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, but they're just really good puzzle games. So those puzzle script games tend to be super linear, where you have to beat the level before moving on. A friend named Daniel Prime, he created a game with some other teammates called what's it called? Cave of Atman. The Cave of Atman, and that's another game you have to play one by one without any variation of how you do it. But for most other puzzle games, right, non-indie, non-browser based, non-free puzzle games, you have some freedom in how you tackle it, and The Witness is no different. So I feel like a lot of people talking about that aspect of the game are really exaggerating.
it's neat, sure. Go do some other areas of the game when you get stuck. But so now we can consider. Or I'll pull up the map. So we'll go back to design oriented. So what's cool about design oriented is when you type in something like the witness or whatever in the top or in the game, it pulls up everything that matches both on the left side for games criticism and the right side for these are just bits of game data, right? And one thing that we have in the game breakdown is load. It's a map of the witness, so this will kind of be helpful for illustrating my point if it actually loads. Load. It's kind of storming over here, so there we go. Map. New tab. Check out this map. So you can. There's a laser here at 5, a laser at 4, a laser at 6, 16, 17, 15, 13, 12, 11, 10. I'm not sure about 19. This one at 9. No, there's no, I don't think there was a laser at that part right there. But so there's lasers in different places, and lasers are usually the areas they mark where you're like, you have done this section. Congratulations, you finished all the puzzles in this section. Shoot a laser up into the sky. Like go to the mountain. This is one of your clear symbols of your overall progress marker. So we have to consider like, okay, if you're solving one of these, I'm gonna go up the mountain as I talk about this, just as a full visual. How beneficial is it for you to leave one area and go to another, right? If the reason why you're stuck in one area is because you don't know a rule, it's very beneficial because you technically shouldn't even be there. You shouldn't even be attempting the puzzle before you learn the rules properly. If the reason why you're stuck in a puzzle is because you didn't learn the rules in the area by going back and refreshing, you should probably go back to the beginning area and refresh on some of the rules. But let's say you kind of know the rules well enough. Well, okay, that's cool. Let's say you just kind of like brain farting because you've done too many puzzles in a row and yada yada. Well, then leaving the area and taking a break would be the best thing. And maybe by the time it takes you to walk into another area and maybe do some really simple puzzles, that would be enough of a break. But essentially, if you need to take a break mentally, then doing other mental tasks is probably not a good idea to give your brain a break. Just like how your physical body works with muscles, you kind of need to let it rest and lay off of it, but that's that. So I don't know how beneficial it is to have an open world like this, have all these sections. You can kind of see how the sections are kind of marked off in different areas. You can see the lasers coming up. I don't know how beneficial it is to the open world design to be able to leave areas and to do other things and come back. It's not too bad because this game has a lot of environmental puzzles. So like this one, and you can trace it. So like let's say you go, the more that you do the environmental puzzles, I think the better, because as we said before, the hints are in the environment, and meditating on what you need to do is a great way to take a break from trying to do it and just kind of chill out. So for that reason, being in a 3D world is a great way to facilitate that learning process. But being in an open world isn't necessary to create that. The open world is sort of the extreme case for what we're talking about. Like, you don't need to be in a huge, sprawling world like this to have those same benefits of what we just talked about, of stepping away from the panel, looking to the 3D environment around you, and solving some environmental puzzles. So some of the cons that are common to big games, big open levels, is that they are hard to get around. And even though this game gives you a boat to sail around the island, it's still pretty slow. There's no teleportation, there's no fast travel, there's nothing like that. I like the fact that there's no teleportation or fast travel, but it is also kind of a drag when you feel like, when you don't know exactly where to go and you're kind of looking you're moving around the same environment and your eyes kind of glaze over because you're kind of looking for something but you don't know what you're looking for. Lots of little frustrations like that that just kind of come up in games that give you this kind of freedom in general happen in this game, and I don't consider that to be sort of a. I don't feel like this game does anything in particular to curb those common negative effects. I think that in like walking across this island over and over. Yeah, so like I'm not sure what you mean by tedious for the environmental puzzles, but if your goal is to find environmental puzzles, then yes, you're going to be looking all over the place for them and trying to see with eyes unclouded, right? Like stuff like this. We're like, hey, wait a minute. That kind of makes a circle shape, and I can kind of draw it from here. I can kind of draw it from here all the way down. Whoa, magic. Right, stuff like that's really interesting. It's about seeing things from the right perspective. And there's stuff like that throughout the whole game. But
I think it's just like the tutorial sections we were talking about. The goal, I mean, even though you can collect all the environmental puzzles and maybe it'll take you a long time to do so, maybe that's the kind of thing you should try to do over the course of years instead of in the 2 month span that you play the game. That's just, whatever you want. But maybe it's more like the hints and that there's a lot of them in there so that it's more likely to catch different types of players with different levels of observation. So I don't mind that there's tons of environmental puzzles. I don't think the goal of this game and the main point is to collect them all like some kind of 3D collectathon platformer type of game. But there's definitely a lot of that here. So, it's for as much as John Pavlov talks about no wasted space and no filler content and none of that. Like you can technically point at stuff like the slow traversal speed and no quick travel and stuff like that as being creating more sort of wasted space than is typical for games who utilize these same sort of design elements such as open worlds and large environments and so on and so forth. But he stuck to his guns, created this game with this level of consistency, and that's a design choice that's interesting of itself. It just may not be the 100% undebatable supporting case for his design philosophy as I think. But a lot of other people just sort of swallow that wholesale, I think. How many puzzles are there in this game? See, it's so hard. I don't know the exact number, but I think I solved over 500 of these panel puzzles, and there's 120 of just these environmental puzzles where you kind of look into the environment and you trace them like that. They're everywhere, and there's lots of them. So, like, the panel puzzles are, I think, the main part of the game, and then you just try to get as many environmental puzzles as you can. This tower right here is the end of the game. I'm not going to show you too much in there because we're really talking about how the open world interacts with the pacing, progression, and teaching of the game. And there's some really cool puzzles in there that I want to talk about, but we'll save that for another stream. But yeah, I mean, this is kind of what I'm thinking about for the game overall. Are there any questions? A lot of people said that the game changes its own logic, right? And it contradicts itself and so on and so forth. I only found one case that I don't quite understand in terms of the internal logic with one of the Tetris puzzles, but overall I thought it was pretty consistent, so I didn't really have a problem with any of that. Let's go down to the swamp. Yeah, so right now I want to review some of the puzzles, and I have to like figure out how to get over there because I didn't leave myself too good of a way back. Oh my gosh, I gotta figure out what this is.
says it's all three of them, right? I need to mess this up so that I can get to the final. Fine. Hello, my Tetris friends. So, okay, so here's something I would include in my write-up. I will probably try to look at these puzzles in this swamp area and try to map out all the different ways you can encounter them. You start off in this area across the bridge over there. You do a few tutorial-like puzzles and 2 linear stretches, and then you find out that you can control this bridge by doing this. Get over here, and some of these areas are unlocked, some of these areas are not. But see how you can go up the bridge here and kind of try to tackle these puzzles right here, or you can try to tackle these puzzles here. I think they give you a little bit of a choice, if I remember how it was before I unlocked everything. And then there's some panels down there you could try right here, right? And then you could go across here and try these panels. I think this place is flooded until the very end. And then you get this bridge and you can go across there or across here. And one of these areas is flooded, but when it's not, you can come down and try some of these puzzles. And then you can come back up and try some of these puzzles. And then you can go over here and mess with some of these things, right? There's some puzzles over there. So like, I really felt that this is where they introduced some of the rotating Tetris pieces. But I really felt like for these blue squares, at least how I played it, you can access one of these rooms before accessing the other. So I think one of these rooms is easier and better at explaining the concept than the others. And because this game gave you a little bit of open variety on which ones you can tackle first, I could see myself saying like, oh, I would have had a much easier time learning the rules if I just did this one first. But since I was just randomly picking places to go, like, I had a little bit of a harder time. And that just could just be like a quirk of my own learning style, or just like a random like, well, there's really no better way to do it because it's either one or the other. So I'd have to look at this section again. But yeah, so each of these underground areas has these subtraction style. Man, that's wicked. Some of the rules here are pretty complex. So this area in the treehouse would be, I think, besides the final mountain, 2 of the most complex areas in terms of introducing these new ideas and taking you through a sequence that tests it. The village is really cool, like mix match of all these different types of puzzles, and then the final mountain is also cool, like mix and match of all these different types of puzzles. But overall, I felt like there's just a lot of sort of uninteresting, oftentimes frustrating, and sometimes boring traversal that I had to do just because this game didn't make it easier to get around. And sometimes you lock yourself out of the areas like this. With this bridge, you can rotate it and not be able to easily walk back here, so you have to go around. I mean, this whole swamp area is like one of the most complex areas, both in terms of the puzzles in it and how you get around. And so is the treehouse, right? So and then when you're looking at these puzzles and you want to review things, like there's oftentimes where like, oh, I want to review what the rules are for this panel puzzle. So I had to run all the way back over here, fix the bridge, go all the way back over here, all the way back, stand on this bridge, and then solve it. This bridge takes like a whole 30 seconds to a minute to reach the other side before you can walk over it and look at that area again. So like, you know, when you want a quick review, because learning is hard enough as it is, and
when you kind of want to refresh on ideas without having to write things down on a piece of paper or take screenshots with your PS4. It'd be kind of neat in this area where a little bit zippier, a little bit more accessible in terms of moving through the environment. And that's just kind of like it was really frustrating. The treehouse was a lot easier, but it still took a little bit of like running around in the environment to get around some of those areas. But aside from those, not really common, but a few of those complaints, especially towards the end of the game when I was looking for every single panel puzzle I could solve, to solve them all and to do them all. It was kind of annoying traveling through this world so many times and like getting lost and looking for that final secret area, and that was annoying. But I think the pros outweigh the cons from this open world design. I mean, that's open world compared to just making a series of large 3D environments. Just making it all continuous like this with no fast travel, and you walk everywhere, and it's all connected. I think the pros outweigh the cons. And it's just there are cons. Some people had complaints that they couldn't remember what their goals were, and it happens. People forget stuff. I think sometimes if you really play the game with like self-reflecting and I guess taking breaks or not looking things up, then you should remember what all the rules are. Sometimes there's a little finicky rules, like can I actually combine these Tetris pieces and do this and that? Like I could see someone not exactly remembering a lot of those, but like I said before, the Tetris piece puzzles, which are at 15, and the Tetris, the stars, and these puzzles here at 6 are the most complex rules wise, and they stack in the most complex way. Yeah. Yeah, so if you're in the chat, if you have any questions about the Witness, our theme for today is pedagogy, which is teaching and the structuring of teaching things, and then pacing. Oh, so I want to say a few things about pacing, and this is why I want to bring up Professor Layton. Let's get some Professor Layton music up in here. Let's do the Unwound Future. There we go. There we go. That's exactly what we wanted. So here's one thing I have to say about a lot of puzzle games. They don't have a lot of good pacing, and here's why. Puzzle games are not like action games. They typically don't. We typically expect puzzle games to get harder and harder as we go along. So towards the end, you're like, give me the hardest puzzles or else. And that's what we kind of demand out of puzzle games. In action games, sometimes we're like, give me the hardest fight, but it's not nearly. There's a lot of highs and lows for action games. Like even Mario games, even within a single level, you're like, oh, the hard part was in the middle, and we have a little simple section that's easy to do. There's a lot of simple actions you can do in a Mario game, like hitting the coin blocks or getting a power up, something simple you can do. But in a puzzle game, it's just like back-to-back puzzle hardness, solve puzzles, and in that way, the experience can be a lot more dense. But another thing puzzle games do is they get harder and harder with that density towards the end, and they don't have like, here's a simple puzzle right near the end to help you relax, because each individual puzzle can be so hard it can take you 15, 30 minutes, hours to beat it, and then they put that kind of challenge back to back. You are not expected to play those back to back for hours and hours and hours and hours. There's a lot of mental strain and people just can't do it. But that's typical for puzzle games. We expect them to be hard and we kind of want that challenge, and we'll take it as over time instead of even being concerned about beating it all in one sitting. So in that way, puzzle games don't have the same pacing
flexibility and same arcs that we see in action games or music rhythm games, or really RPGs, or really many other genres. We don't see like easier sections. We don't have these like quiet moments, these rising actions. We don't have falling actions. That's story terms from storytelling, but it's the same principle. And we don't have refrains often in puzzle games. So like in the video that we watched yesterday, we talked about reprisals. I'll show you the chart. So as we make these videos, I'm putting a lot of the notes and I'm color coding them with our color coding system that we have in Design Oriented, right? And so as you can see here in this little chart, reprisals and tutorial sequences right here, just basically repeating stuff for the sake of teaching the player and reminding them things. We were talking about that earlier. But in an action game or in other types of genres, you can make reprisals that are literally things they've done before, but because of the physical kinetic interactivity and even the dynamic interactions of doing something you've done before, there's a lot more variation and engagement that can happen there. Like even if you put a question mark coin block in a Mario game and just stick it there and then Mario jumps for it, like there's a lot of skill in getting every single coin out. There's a lot of skill in avoiding the nearby enemy and still getting the coins out. And sometimes it's just a fun, simple thing you can do to just get coins and slow the player down and give them something to do or whatever. Like there's all kinds of reasons why sticking the very same type of challenge into an action game works better in an action game than it does in a puzzle game. Same thing with music rhythm. You play the same chorus lines, the same exact note sequences in music because music is very repetitive, and through that repetition it builds its ideas and grammars out, and that's really important and natural to us. But in puzzle games, they don't do that. So that's one of the reasons why puzzle games have this pacing issue. And so when you get towards the end of a puzzle game, you get harder and harder puzzles, and there's like no arc to it oftentimes. And it kind of beats you down sometimes, and you're like, oh, that's not cool. Professor Layton has this problem. Every time you enter a challenge in Professor Layton, you're like, hey, let me learn. I gotta learn new rules. Hold on, give me a second. And then you read all the text at the top, think about it, and maybe it's a new type of puzzle that they never introduced in the game. So you have to think. You don't want to get it wrong because you lose your picorettes. So you think, and then you're like, okay, I think I got it, or whatever. I'll try all these combinations, and just depending on whatever your skill as a player or any other random factors, some of those can take much longer than others. And even though they design some of the puzzles at the end where you can kind of brute force it to get through it, especially in some of the more tense narrative elements, narrative sections, they kind of really want you to get through some of the puzzles, so they make it somewhat easy for you to get through. Pacing wise, it can still be a bummer, and having to stop, read, think, and then do those puzzles, and then get back into the swing of the action of the story, and then stop, read, think, do these puzzles. That's just a real sort of herky-jerky start-stop pacing in terms of the kind of smoother curves you get from just watching a movie, or even the smoother curves you get from just playing action games. This is completely jarring, and I think it's kind of bad, but you put up with it because it's cool enough. Same thing, so when you play a normal puzzle game and it's just a series of challenges in a menu, you stop when you stop, you pick it up when you pick it up, it's just a menu, no big deal. But The Witness, in framing its puzzles within this larger sort of spatial context, it's an open world set on an island. It has a bit of a drive to it that I think is similar to Professor Layton's story. Like when you get towards the end of Professor Layton's story, you want to keep going because it's the freaking end of the story, and the puzzles kind of stop you cold sometimes. Same with The Witness, when you're going down this mountain at the last part, which I'm not going to spoil too much of it, but I'm just going up at the mountain. You're in there, you're like, oh, this is great. But there are a lot of puzzles in that mountain, and it's going to take some time, especially if you get stuck. And then the puzzles near the end are some of the most interesting and also some of the hardest puzzles in the game. And then there's even more puzzles at the end, even when you think it's over. That's bad pacing. I mean, each one, like, I don't know if anyone's like timed or have average times for how long it takes players to do each of those sections. But from what I thought was going to be sort of slow to faster pace. Even though you're seeing familiar items, your familiarity and having learned all these things so far will make you go through the puzzles faster, and you kind of shoot through the end and enjoy the credits. It wasn't that at all. And having and like Jonathan Blow tweeted about, but what also is like common to puzzle game experiences, having to stop and think about things and come back to it later is common and something you should do. Therefore, doesn't it make more sense to pace the ending of your sort of thematically relevant puzzle game experience? One where the player is less likely to have to stop and think and come back. So I think it's a little bit of incongruous to design a game with an ending that makes you want to push through it, but then have some of your hardest puzzles like Professor Layton does, but to a greater extent like The Witness does. So I don't really like that. It's kind of irritating. It kind of gives a very odd, again, feel because of the pacing to the ending. So where you don't have a nice, clear idea and experience in your head, you have all these starts and stops and all these weird gaps in your experience. I mean, if you take any movie and in the last, let's say, 15 minutes of the movie, you pause it every 3 minutes and you have the person go do something completely separate and come back and watch it, that has an effect on the viewer's experience. And it has an effect on our experience playing The Witness, so I don't consider that to be a good thing. Oh, it's Osprey East. I remember that name. Very familiar. The environmental puzzles help The Witness get away from some of that puzzle fatigue that you're talking about, I think. Yeah, we were talking about that earlier, where the environment, both looking for clues in the environment and searching for the environmental perspective puzzles are things that really help round out the game experience. Because when you absolutely can't solve a puzzle, but you can do those things, not only are those easier to do, right, and they stress the brain differently, but they keep you in the area and they keep you focused. Cool. Yeah. Hanano puzzle. That's the one with the flowers, right? I was just talking about that yesterday when we had some guests on the stream. Talked about some of those Jelly No puzzle and the Hanano puzzle should have been created by the same Japanese indie developer, I believe. And I played the Hanano puzzle. It was a great game. I didn't finish it. It's kind of like Snake Bird. I need to get back to those. But yeah, overall, we were talking about a lot of pros and cons to both learning these things in The Witness and playing through The Witness, pacing, how much the open world setting actually helps, how much it hurts, what are some of the bumps, if the bumps are common to other games, and so on and so forth. We went over a lot of details, yeah, so I'll be wrapping up the stream right about now, especially before the freaking storm causes another blackout. But yeah, feel free if you have any questions now about The Witness or anything. We're going to stream again on Thursday, 3 p.m. We're going to be listening to criticism that's relevant to the topic. What is the topic? Can anybody see that on the schedule that's on the Twitch page? The Thursday topic. Even though I wrote Tuesday twice, I know what I did. That's cool. He's making another game. But yeah, and these are all. That's pretty much all I had to say about The Witness, and basically it's open world in this scaffolding. Let me turn up this late music. Oh, cool. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, and thanks for joining everyone, too. We're going to be doing this as a regular thing, so hopefully everything will grow from here. Hopefully I'm being pretty clear about what I'm saying. If you
have any questions like you have before in the chat, just throw them out there. Feel free to challenge me as I work out some of these thoughts on air and do some research. If you want to help me do research for whatever reason, or if you want to write whatever you want to write and bounce ideas off of me or anyone else on the stream, that's just, we're all welcome and stuff like that. How would I have tackled this game instead of using an open world as a base point? It's funny you said that. So, when I first heard about The Witness, hopefully the music's not too loud. When I first heard about The Witness, I just only heard a very small inkling of what it is, right? I was like, oh, interesting. Jonathan Blow, just going on an island, solving things, looking in the environment. Okay, I don't want to know anything more about this game. For the most part, I stayed away from all details about this game for a long time. Right? I didn't look up anything. I didn't care what people were saying. I was pretty sure I was going to buy it. I was set on buying it. Pretty sure I was going to enjoy it. This is one of my favorite games of the year. And, you know, great. Like, great for me. Great for everybody. Witness, yay. But in the years that it took him to release this game, I had brainstormed my own, wow, Bo, you're loud. My own ideas based on some of the things that I was inspired by, based on some of the few things that I knew about the game, right? There we go. Cool. I thought of an idea where you'll play a lot of puzzles, kind of like Professor Layton, where they're very disjointed from each other. They're very sort of like a person walked across the road. Somebody wanted to do this with their groceries. Somebody wanted to push this many blocks into a thing. Somebody's trying to drive the car and fit it inside of this driveway. Like all these sort of like real world thematic puzzles. And I was like, wouldn't it be cool if a lot of these puzzles would connect to each other? And I was like, yeah, that would be cool, but how would I do it? There we go. Cool. I thought of an idea where you'll play a lot of puzzles, kind of like Professor Layton, where they're very disjointed from each other. They're very sort of like a person walked across the road. Somebody wanted to do this with their groceries. Somebody wanted to push this many blocks into a thing. Somebody's trying to drive the car and fit it inside of this driveway. Like all these sort of like real world thematic puzzles. And I was like, wouldn't it be cool if a lot of these puzzles would connect to each other? And I was like, yeah, that would be cool, but how would I do that? So I came up with this idea where I guess one of the easiest ways to describe it is like Minecraft, where everything in the world is composed of cubes, right? And when you break away some of these cubes, or maybe it's like Picross 3D, when you break away some of these cubes, it reveals these shapes, these little models, and the models then, if you break enough of them, let you solve additional puzzles that are like Professor Layton. So let's say you have a how did the chicken cross the road puzzle. If you unveil the chicken and then you unveil the road, you can do the chicken and road puzzle, and so on and so forth. So the more you unlock in the world, the more different kinds of puzzles that you could do. And I thought it'd be really interesting if the thematic relevance of the puzzles was something that was dynamic, right? Something that had thematic echoes across the various things you can do, right? So like you can zoom in really close to the chicken and get some puzzles that are really related to the chicken. Like I don't know what that'd be, but just kind of work with me. Like, oh, puzzles about chickens and flapping their wings and chickens living in a chicken coop or something chicken related. But you zoom out a little bit, and if you can capture the chicken and the road in the same sort of screen view, you could get a puzzle about how the chicken crossed the road. And you're like, that's interesting. So that means if you put more things in your view, the puzzle not only changes its nature, but it's more complex. And that'd be cool if the more complex puzzle didn't completely abandon some of the things you learned when you were zoomed in on the chicken, like some thematically relevant but still true principles, maybe not necessarily rules, because again, like Professor Layton, these puzzles are fairly disjointed from each other. But then it'd be cool if the more you zoomed out and the more things you got into your view, the more complex your puzzles became, up until the point where they become unsolvable, right? Or seemingly unsolvable. You're like, at what point did this experience go for something that was really easy to solve, trivially easy, to something that was really complex, and you could kind of walk the line between scope levels of the puzzles just by including more or less things into your view. So if I were to make a game like that, it wouldn't rely on an open world system, because you could be a disembodied head, you could be floating around, you could tap on, you could like zoom out and tap on something and zoom in like at any point, and it'd all be about understanding that at various levels of zoom, that the puzzles take on various levels of complexity that are thematically resonant with each other, and therefore you don't need to be a physical person walking around the world like I am right now in The Witness. Like, you can zoom in and out at your leisure, teleport between zones, all to make that gameplay experience a little more smooth. And that's how I would design something similar to The Witness, but without necessarily being with the open world at its core. It would be about the thematic zoom levels at its core, and therefore it wouldn't be tied down to this sort of organic spatial travel. So Osprey E says, normally the game tends to signpost if you'll need to know certain symbols for an area, but I was surprised you can get deep into the mountain before finding out you need to know some symbols from the quarry and the treehouse to advance. Oh, so in this game you need, I guess, 7 out of the 11 lasers to go down into the mountain. And he's saying you can get into the mountain without doing the areas that have some of those necessary things. Well, that makes perfect sense, and I've actually never thought about that, because I unlocked all the lasers before going down to the mountain because I thought it was cool, or maybe I was crazy. So that's another sort of progression pacing issue. I'm gonna write that in my notes because that's kind of worth bringing up. Sequencing and ordering, and then I'm gonna write enter the mountain without quarry or treaty house skills, ? That's interesting. See, I don't know, I only played this game once, so I'm not like crazy. I don't know all these different ways that people can do X, Y, and Z. Even though you're gonna have to not trigger those area lasers to get there, so that you make the mountain feel like even slower struggle. You have to backtrack all the way out and learn the other areas. I think the game's pacing structure is pretty incredible. That's just one thing that surprised me. Who's my favorite game designer / designers? It's like a combination of Miyamoto and Masahiro Sakurai. I mean, Smash Brothers is my favorite game, the game series, period. But then I also played Medios. I've played his Kirby games. I haven't played Kirby's Air Ride, but I've also played Kid Icarus Uprising on 3DS, which is also one of my favorite games. You know, I've written so much about both Smash and Kid Icarus Uprising. I'll show you, because it's fun. I just type in Richard. I type in Uprise. But there's a lot I've learned about studying Miyamoto's particular type of level design and Sakurai's particular way he designs his games. And I taken this off of here. I have my own distinct style. I have my own types of level design that I think are pretty unique to me, the way I see the world and understand things, and trying to express that. It's kind of like what I just explained in my theoretical puzzle game. I really love the idea of playing with frames of reference and zooming in and out sort of smoothly, different levels of complexity. So while The Witness is a game that's very much like, oh, here's a bunch of here's a bunch of different perspectives that you need to be aware of to figure out what The Witness is and what it means and to enjoy this game. Panel puzzles, environment, the narrative conceit of the island, and then the conceit on top of that of the developer playing the game, and then maybe even one layer beyond that, right? It's got a whole bunch of sort of framing that happens. But I am different, and I like to contain a lot of what I want to do in terms of framing and conveying ideas within the sort of core experience of the fiction that I'm trying to tell. So I don't like to zoom out and be all
like postmodern and meta level where I actually step into my own stories. Did James Joyce do that? I don't like to step into my own stories. I don't like to make the user, the player, painfully aware that they are flying in between layers of artifice. Like, you're reading a story, but did you know you're reading a story? And did you know that you thinking about you reading a story is another layer? Like, I mean, I did a lot of that when I was in college studying creative writing, and that's why I think it's something that I want to move away from. I think it's kind of an amateurish move to do that in general, or at least it's a very difficult thing to pull off, and it's something that many writers or creators can fail to do properly as they try to convey their ideas. That's something we'll talk about on the Thursday and Friday Witness podcast. All the different layers of the witness and different methods to convey an idea, and the pros and cons of that, contrasting with different writing styles and so on and so forth. But there's a lot to be said about that. I have a really interesting thing I want to say comparing to creative writing that I think nobody else is talking about, because a lot of people, when they talk about the witness, are just repeating stuff Jonathan Blow's saying, and I'm challenging every single facet of this game's design and using other games to draw comparisons, both other puzzle games and other games in general. So I think that's important. Oh, so like what I was saying, my favorite designer is Sakurai Miyamoto. Here's the Kid Icarus Uprising review I did. You can see the timeline and all the fancy colors. I talked about mechanics and feedback and systems and rules and power-ups and design space and it's difficult to design all these things. Like, I covered this game in super great detail over the course of like a few weeks. It took me 2 weeks to write them all. Let's see this. And the total amount of words for the whole thing, I think it's 20,000, 15,000. We'll see in a second. Yeah, 20,000 words, but there's a lot in there because I really did a deep dive on that game. But the last one right here is just kind of right what you were talking about. I did a comparison of Miyamoto's design philosophies and styles versus Sakurai, and all these different ways that they differ, grabbing quotes from interviews and talking about how their styles are different, but how I'm somewhere in the middle and I want to take things in a different direction. You can read that anytime you want. Oh, it's so good. Cool. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. Spread the word. Try to get more people who are interested in talking about design in on it. There's lots of fun things we can do in chat once we really get the ball rolling and get comfortable with this. Style. I'm gonna unpause this little thingy here so we can get the colors going. We're no longer talking about level design, so it can dance around if it wants. But try to tune in on Thursday if you can. Drop tweets, ask questions all the time. By the end of this, I really want to have a really clear, concise idea of what I think of the witness, and also framing what other people think as well, because this little crazy chart that we're pulling out ideas and trying to connect all these ideas together, it's only going to get bigger. And that's just how complicated games are. It takes a lot of organization to keep it straight, but it should be worth in the end because we're going to have some really clear idea about what the witness is, how it works, and what we think of it. So stay tuned, and hopefully I'll see you guys next time. Signing out because I gotta go to bed. Peace.